It gives me great pleasure to welcome you all to this evening's lecture. I acknowledge, celebrate, and pay my respects to the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people of the Canberra region and to all First Nations Australians on whose traditional lands we meet and work, and whose cultures are among the oldest continuing cultures in human history. This evening, we are very privileged to have a marvellous speaker who will be introduced by my wonderful colleague, Dr. Katarzyna Williams, the Deputy Director of Centre for the Centre for European Studies here at ANU. Kasha, I hand over to you now. Thank you. Good afternoon, delegation, ambassadors, guests and colleagues. It's my great pleasure to welcome you at this very special event. In August this year, 5 years passed since the fraudulent president election in Belarus. 14 political prisoners were released by Lukashenko and Joe this year, including Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya, who spent 5 years in solitary confinement. But many more people who simply want freedom are still imprisoned or missing, and the terror continues. It is thus so important, as the democratic Belarusian opposition leaders emphasize, to keep pressure on the Lukashenko regime. It's important to support the resistance to Russification of the country, against which Belarusian opposition actively warns. I'm delighted to welcome Belarusian opposition leader Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya and her team. Since our first discussion with Kanak Vichorka, I think 2 years ago, I was very much looking forward to meet Sviatlana and the whole team. Before I officially introduce Sviatlana, I know she does not need introduction, but I will do it anyway. I wish to acknowledge the Polish Embassy's role, and particularly acting ambassador Marcin Kowalski, for putting us in touch with Strama several years ago. And I also like to note that promoting Belarusian people's democratic aspirations was among the key priorities of the Polish presidency of the Council of the European Union earlier this year. I also wish to thank Lithuanian Ambassador Darius Putis and his team for their support of the delegation's visit here in Canberra and working with us kindly to coordinate all the trip moving plans. Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya is the national leader of Belarus, the head of the United Transition Cabinet, and the president-elect of Belarus, who independent observers agree won the presidential election on 9 August 2020 against the long-standing dictator Alexander Lukashenko. After the start of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, Sviatlana reformed the movement's leadership by creating and chairing the United Transition Cabinet, the movement's decision-making body. Belarusian anti-war activists, led by Sviatlana, conducted underground resistance in Belarus by sabotaging the railway transportation of Russian troops, as well as volunteering to Belarusian staffed units fighting for Ukraine. As the leader of the Belarusian democratic movement, she has visited 28 countries, or maybe more now, gathered support and advocating for release of more than 1,500 political prisoners and a peaceful transition of power through free and fair election. In meetings with President Biden, Chancellor Merkel, President Macron, and other European world leaders, not only European leaders, Sviatlana emphasized the need for a braver response to the actions of the Belarusian dictatorship. Sviatlana became a symbol of the peaceful struggle for democracy and strong female leadership. And I may also add that, at least in Poland, we will say that Belarusian revolution is a woman.
Dear Katarzyna Williams, thank you for your kind introduction. Dear Professor John Leach, Professor Nicholas Biddle, Director Anne McNaughton, friends, excellencies, dear students, it's a real honor and privilege to step on Australian soil. This is my very first visit to this part of the world, and I believe that it's the first time a Belarusian politician comes to Australia with an official visit. And here I want to thank the Australian Minister of Foreign Affairs, Penny Wong, and the wonderful team of the Department of Foreign Affairs for bringing me here. Today in the Parliament, the first question I received was surprisingly not about Belarus or Ukraine or a war. It was about Australia and what is my impression of your wonderful land. Well, I haven't yet seen the beauty of your country. I haven't even seen a single kangaroo yet. But what I have seen already are many wonderful people who care about Ukraine, who care about Belarus, despite the distance that separates us. Australians not only care, they cherish their freedom and their democracy. And that's what makes Australia so inspiring for others and such a powerful voice in the world. Believe me, we in Belarus know very well how easy it is to lose democracy and how hard to get it back. I'm truly honored to speak at the Australian National University, one of the world's great centers of learning, critical thinking, and global perspective. And I want to thank the Center for European Studies for the tremendous work you do in bringing focus on Belarus, on Ukraine, and on the whole our region. You know, I have spoken in many places over the last few years, at rallies, in parliaments, in conferences, or big assemblies. Today, I see many students here, and honestly speaking, speaking to students always makes me a little more nervous, because it's usually the students, not the politicians, who ask the toughest questions. Maybe even tougher than during today question time in Parliament. I'm also tremendously glad to see some old friends in this room. Ambassador of Poland, Martin Kowalewski, and Lithuanian Ambassador Darius Degutis. Maybe not many people know that Darius is not only diplomat, he is professor, and my right hand, Denis Kuczynski, who is also present here, happens to be one of his former students. I have to say that Lithuania and Poland are our biggest allies and supporters of our fight for democracy. And also, of course, I want to welcome Ambassador of Estonia, Jan Reingold, today with us. So, dear friends, Belarusian and Australian people share not only common values, but also common history. Historically, Australia was a safe haven for Belarusians fleeing terror from the Russian Empire, then Soviet Union, and now from brutal Lukashenko's regime. Thousands of Belarusians live in Sydney, Melbourne, Adelaide, or Perth. They participate in public life, contribute to Australian well-being, but also, unfortunately, even here, they face transnational repressions by the Belarusian regime. Not many in Australia also know that Belarusians contributed a lot to Australian military glory. Yesterday in Sydney, I officially commemorated Belarusian Anzacs. Many of them fought and died for Australia. The story of Belarusian Anzac reminds me of Belarusian volunteers in Ukraine, fighting shoulder to shoulder with Ukrainians as we speak. Also, not far from here, you have a mountain named after Belarus-born hero Tadeusz Kościuszka. But you call him differently, I guess Kościaska. But Kościuszka is our common Polish-Belarusian hero, and he fought for freedom of Belarus, Poland, and the United States, and became a global symbol of the fight for freedom. You can see signs of Belarusians, more signs of Belarusians' presence here. For example, iconic stores named Meyer connect our nations because Sidney Meyer from the Belarusian town of Krychev was fleeing Russian terror and finally became a successful businessman here in Australia. Yes, dear friends, Belarus may be far away country and not a big one. In fact, it's 37 times smaller than Australia. And actually, many Australians might ask, why should we care? Let me give you a few reasons to care. First, Belarus plays a crucial role in Russia's war against Ukraine. Our geography makes Belarus central to Europe's security. Without Belarus, the Russian invasion might never have happened. Belarus shows Russia's true intentions. Moscow wants Ukraine to become like today's Belarus, obedient, controlled, and weak. The Kremlin doesn't see Belarus, Ukraine, or even Moldova as independent nations, but as disobedient children to be punished and brought back under control. By understanding what is happening in Belarus, we can better see how to weaken Putin and how to help Ukraine to win. And that must be our shared goal. Second, Belarus is the perfect case to study, showing how democracy, human rights, and security are all interconnected. A dictator who doesn't respect its own citizens will never respect his neighbors. The terror that started inside our country has turned outward into migration attacks on our neighbors, the hijacking of airplanes, and the most recently provocations like air balloons crossing into Lithuania. And the third, Belarus reminds us why democracy matters and why it must never be taken for granted. When I travel and meet people, I often feel that many have forgotten how fragile freedom can be. What is happening in Belarus is a warning and a lesson for all democratic societies. The threat to democracy in one country threatens democracy everywhere. And I think it's the obligation of all democratic countries to support those who are fighting for their own democracy. So, dear friends, what is Belarus now? One Italian journalist called it communism with a taste of cappuccino. Because sometimes it feels that Belarus is stuck in time. Where else could you see McDonald's right next to KGB with a prison for political hostages? Or, for example, a modern Tesla's parking near Soviet-time Lenin monument. And this hypocrisy is everywhere. You know, if you don't look deeper behind walls, maybe you will not even differentiate dictatorship from a normal country, because dictators are usually masters of wrapping outdated goods in brand new packages. So squeezed between European Union and Russia, West and East, Belarus was always on the front line between democracy and tyranny, in the center of the wars, repeated clashes of civilization. But never before the question of geopolitical choice stood so high as now. Today it is being decided or Belarus will remain a Russian colony or finally break free from its claws. The thing is that pro-Russian regime of Alexander Lukashenko ruling Belarus for 30 years chose Russia and traded away Belarus independence in exchange for Moscow political protection. Lukashenko's system survived not on innovations or competitiveness, but on cheap Russian oil and gas and endless loans from the Kremlin. Many things changed in 2020. That is where my story began. I never planned to run the office and I was never interested in politics. My husband, Sergei Tikhanovsky, wanted to run for president of Belarus. He actually was ordinary blogger. He traveled across the country asking people one simple question: what is happening in your life? The answers were heartbreaking. Stories of corruption, poverty, injustice, and fear. For this, for simply listening to people, he was arrested. And to support him, I submitted my own candidacy, and people supported me. People often ask me, what prepared you most for politics? And I always say that raising two children, because you learn negotiation, crisis management, and how to survive on very little sleep. So that time, in 2020, I was joined by an incredible team, and together we united the democratic opposition. We traveled across Belarus, speaking about change, dignity, and truth. And to our surprise, millions of Belarusians stood with us. We, Belarusian people, won elections in 2020, in the first round. But, as dictators do, Lukashenko refused to step down. People who had never protested before came to the streets. Grandmothers with flowers, fathers with children on their shoulders, students with handmade signs. It became the largest democratic awakening in the history of Belarus. Regime answered with violence. And the terror that began then hasn't stopped for a single day, 5 years in a row. Even now, people are detained daily for supporting me, for showing solidarity with Ukraine, or simply for speaking the Belarusian language, which itself has become an act of resistance. Dear friends, when I speak about repression, about political prisoners, my heart is bleeding. At least 1,300 political prisoners remain behind bars in Belarus. Doctors, workers, poets, teachers, IT students. Just recently, my husband Sergei was released after 5 years in prison. You can imagine my joy, even as I almost couldn't recognize him. He had lost half his weight and looked like he had come out of Gulag. This is what political prisoners in Belarus have to endure. Another political prisoner, Andrei Podnebenny, a young man of just 36 years, was found dead in his cell this September under mysterious circumstances. He had been sentenced to 16 years of prison for opposing the dictator. And this is the reality we face. Systematic repression, disappearances, deaths in detention. The regime does this to create fear. But what they don't understand is that fear can easily turn into fury, and fury can turn into determination. Dear friend, as I said already, Belarus is not just a domestic story. It is part of the bigger picture, a picture that includes Ukraine, Russia, China, Iran, North Korea. When we see that North Korea sends soldiers to fight against Ukraine, that China supports Russia, we know that this is a global fight. The authoritarian regimes of the world are watching each other, they learn from each other, they support each other, they copy each other's tactics, censorship, surveillance, cyber attacks, propaganda, repressions. When Lukashenko faced no real consequences for terror in Belarus, Putin took note. When the world failed to stop the first invasion of Ukraine in 2014, Putin grew bolder. When the international community sent weak messages instead of strong sanctions, dictators everywhere grow stronger. This is why I say authoritarianism is contagious, but so is democracy, I hope. Today, resistance in Belarus went underground. You no longer see people protesting openly, but it doesn't mean that people have given up. I don't know when or how changes will come to Belarus, but we must be ready when the window of opportunity appears. And that window of opportunity will most likely be linked to Ukraine. That is why at every forum, at every meeting, I say, give Ukraine everything it needs to win this war. When Ukraine is strong and Russia is weak, Belarus will also have its chance for freedom. Dear friends, when repressions forced me to live into exile, we didn't stop working. In exile, we built a new democratic movement, flexible, resilient, and modern. We created alternative institutions of power in exile, like United Transitional Cabinet, the Coordination Council. We have formalized relations with the European Union, United States, Canada, and the United Kingdom, and hopefully soon with Australia as well. Together, we coordinate humanitarian support. We help families of political prisoners fight disinformation and prepare for democratic transition in Belarus. Yes, we don't have the state behind us. It was seized by dictator. But we have the vibrant movement, a civil resistance movement with the state functions, and with legitimacy given not by force, but by the will of the people. We have created a kind of Belarus 2.0, outside the reach of the regime. Our media is run from Vilnius. Our students study in Warsaw. Our ministers work from Brussels and Kiev. Our parliament is on Zoom. This is a new kind of struggle, one that is borderless, one that uses not only solidarity but also technology. Thank you. Dear friends, it's obligation of Belarusian people to win our country back, but we cannot do this alone. And this is where you come in. So to the young people in this room, I want to say that your voices matter. You are the generation that will define the future of democracy. Learn about our struggle, share our stories, invite Belarusians to your discussions, write your thesis about the Belarusian resistance, be curious, be engaged. This is not just political science, this is real life. To the scholars and academics, research the dynamics of hybrid regimes, study repression, exile governance, disinformation, and resistance. Use your experience to expose injustice and design solutions. Knowledge is power, but only if it is shared. To the policy makers and diplomats, time matters. Every day that Lukashenko stays in power, more people suffer. Sanctions must be stronger, smarter, and better enforced. Support for civil society must be long-term and strategic. Recognize the role of democratic forces. Include us in international forums. Engage with the future Belarus, not the past one. And to all of you, don't forget us. Don't let Belarus or Ukraine disappear from the world's attention. Talk about what is happening, about the political prisoners, about our struggle for democracy, about the courage of ordinary Belarusians who stand up against tyranny, about Ukrainian soldiers who are fighting in cold trenches. Awareness is the first step to solidarity. Support organizations that help Belarusians in exile and the families of political prisoners through donation, volunteering, or simply by sharing their stories. Because every contribution, no matter how small, helps someone survive, heal, and keep hope alive. There is also the growing Belarusian community in Australia, people who fled repressions and are now rebuilding their lives here. I ask Australians to welcome them, to listen to their stories, and to include them in local civic and cultural life. These people carry not only pain, but also incredible strength and talent. They can contribute to Australian society like Sidney Meyer did a long time ago. And they remain a living bridge to Belarus that will one day be free. You know, ladies and gentlemen, freedom is not a privilege. It is a shared responsibility. And every act of solidarity from people across the world, including here in Australia, brings us closer to freedom. You know, when I left Belarus in 2020, I thought that it would be for a few weeks, maybe for a few months. I believed that this nightmare would end quickly. It has been 5 years. And yet, I still believe we will return home. I believe my children will go back to a free Belarus. I believe that political prisoners will walk free and that truth and justice will prevail. Because history is not written by dictators, it is written by people. I truly believe that Belarus can become a success story of peaceful transition to democracy. And I want Australia to be part of this story, a story where democracy wins and tyranny fades in the history. Slava Ukraini, long live Belarus.